BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? In this episode, I will be responding to the book Portrait of a Killer by Patricia Cornwell and looking at her Jack the Ripper suspect, Walter Sickert. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who operated in England in 1888. And whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. Some people believe that Jack the Ripper started committing crimes well before the quote-unquote Autumn of Terror, which is actually the Summer of Terror. The first confirmed Ripper crime occurred on August 31st with the murder of Polly Nichols. Next came the murder of Annie Chapman, then the double event, where Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered on one night, and then the murder of Mary Kelly on November 9th of 1888. But Patricia Cornwell is going to be someone who is definitely going to think that the Ripper committed crimes outside of that time frame. And I did a standalone episode called Jack the Ripper Suspect Walter Sickert that you can hear on this channel. And I just did that as a suspect profile, so I was always curious what Patricia Cornwell had to say in her book Portrait of a Killer. But at the same time, I confess I was somewhat pessimistic about going into this story and looking at her observations, and I guess curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to just sit down and explore her book. But I'm going to confess that this is not a traditional book review. Instead, it is a book discussion where I'm just pulling out some ideas from the book and responding to them. Patricia Cornwell talks about being a novelist, and that's her primary occupation. She needs no introduction in America, one of the more famous novelists that you can find in places like Barnes & Noble. But she says that she did lots of true crime research as she would prepare to develop her fictional characters, and she even begins the book by telling the story of being in a courtroom in the 1990s when she had a chance to witness the proceedings for a murderer and rapist named John Royster, and she just had this shocking impression that he was so polite, he was non-threatening, and he didn't give off any impression at all that he would have been a murderer, but he was actually a very methodical and calculating criminal and rapist. I mean, going through great lengths to avoid getting caught for the crimes, but ultimately he was captured. And as somebody who talks about a lot of true crime cases here on Black Box Online Radio, I am not surprised at all. I mean, it isn't shocking that some people are good at putting on the facade. This is how these criminals get away with it. Serial killers, among other criminals, they get away with it because they do have the ability to convince people that they're non-threatening. They have the ability to put on the facade that they are somebody else, but in all reality, that's just what it is, a facade. But Patricia Cornwell began exploring the material, and she ended up with the suspect Walter Sickert. However, by her own admission, she is not the first person to talk about Walter Sickert as a Jack the Ripper suspect, and as I was going through the comments section on my first video, Jack the Ripper Suspect Walter Sickert, I saw a comment from Jay, a longtime follower of this program, giving a shout out to Jay, who said, Patricia Cornwell should have given more credit to Stephen Knight, who talks about Walter Sickert as part of his Jack the Ripper theory in the book The Final Solution. And absolutely, I agree, 100%, 110%, because she has these allusions to that book that are found in Portrait of a Killer, but it's just statements as vague as what I already said. I'm not the first person to talk about Walter Sickert as a Jack the Ripper suspect, or there are other theories involving Walter Sickert as a Jack the Ripper suspect. But if she's using ideas from somebody else, she should have given them credit, and I really don't know why people don't do this more often. It doesn't detract at all from their observations and their theorizing and their commentary on any unsolved case. Like, say, for example, if I were to write a book about Walter Sickert being Jack the Ripper and take Patricia Cornwell's observations and not give her credit, would that be fair? Even if I agreed with some parts of her theory, I mean, like, how on earth would that be acceptable? So I'm just really quite curious why she didn't do that, except for one particular sentence that is in the book where she talks about how there was this theory that involved Walter Sickert. Stephen Knight talked about a Masonic conspiracy and a royal conspiracy involving Walter Sickert, Sir William Gull, a carriage driver, and it's, again, connected to the Masons and the royal family down the line. And she just said that she didn't want to talk about aspects of the case that she didn't believe were true. But if she is borrowing any type of ideas from him, she should have given him credit. To discuss more about Walter Sickert, he was born in 1860, so he would have been 28 years old at the time of the Whitechapel murders, or the start of the Whitechapel murders. And this is age appropriate for being Jack the Ripper. Most people estimate that the Ripper was in his late 20s or early 30s. And you can find that in the psychological profiles that have been created about Jack the Ripper. Although, as we all know, there are going to be Ripper suspects all up and down the spectrum in terms of age, but he was 28 years old at the time. Walter Sickert was absolutely more famous for being a painter rather than a Jack the Ripper suspect, and one reason why Patricia Cornwell began to suspect that he was Jack the Ripper is he made multiple paintings that were Ripper-themed in origin, as well as talking about other murders, most notably the Camden town murder, which occurred in the early 20th century. And as we're going to see, Patricia Cornwell is someone who just simply believes that the Ripper did not stop committing crimes on November 9th of 1888 with the murder of Mary Kelly. I think that the most interesting parts of her book don't deal with the interpretations of the artwork. Instead, it's talking about Walter Sickert and his childhood. He was born in Germany, although he was of mixed European descent. And he is more famous for his Danish heritage. I mean, it's even just stated flat out that he could be thought of as Danish and not German. And he was the son of a man named Oswald Sickert, and he sounds like a very complicated character. And because Patricia Cornwell is a very wealthy novelist from the United States, she has the ability to talk about how much money she spent on the case and the investigations and purchasing this and that, and she hired a translator to translate the letters and writings of Oswald Sickert, Walter Sickert's father, and he would write in a blend of High German and Low German, and it had to be translated twice, one from the other and so on. But what it sounds like is that Oswald Sickert was somebody who had 6 children with his wife, but the only child that he bonded with at all, or that even wanted to interact with and talk to at all, was Walter. Walter Sickert was the oldest of the 6 children. And Oswald Sickert also showed no real regard and respect for his wife. And then, in terms of the family heritage, though, they were very talented people, it seems. Walter Sickert even had an ancestor who went on to become he was a painter who was commissioned by the King of Denmark. But with Oswald Sickert, his father, he would write poetry, he wrote plays, and he was also somewhat of an artist himself. But what it seemed like is that he used his wife for money, and he didn't necessarily care about the family at all. If he ever earned any money on his own, he would spend it on booze, and that is almost a direct quotation from the book Portrait of a Killer. And Walter Sickert's sister was a woman named Helena Maria Sickert, and she changed her name after she married, but she went on to become somewhat of a prolific writer herself because she was involved in the suffragette movement, and she wrote a memoir where she was talking about her experiences, and Patricia Cornwell used this as a big window into Walter Sickert's childhood, stating that the father didn't care about the other kids, he only wanted to talk to Walter Sickert, and interestingly, Walter claimed that he remembered everything that his father told him, even if they were just walking in a cemetery one day, and his father said, "Hey, look, there's a tombstone. That's kind of weird, but you'll never remember it." Something to the effect of that. And decades later, Walter Sickert was just showing off that he could remember the exact inscription that was on the tombstone. And this I think, is really interesting, but I also think that it's rather weird and bizarre for the following reason. Jack the Ripper was targeting women, and Jack the Ripper seemed to have some type of problem with women. Jack the Ripper targeted exclusively female victims, but the way that the story is shared in the book Portrait of a Killer, it almost seems like Walter Sickert's animosity should be directed toward his father rather than his mother, or directed toward men rather than women. And the only way I thought that she could reconcile this type of theorizing is that saying something to the effect that, all right, he's just listening to his father, showing disrespect to his mother the whole time. Maybe he just internalized that and developed a very poor relationship with women, a very low opinion of women, and that caused him to go on to develop homicidal tendencies later on in life. And it's not even laid out exactly like that in Portrait of a Killer. That is just my own attempt to try and put 2 and 2 together from reading Patricia Cornwell's book. So to get away from the psychological profiling for a second, I think that there are some things that are so much more fascinating to discuss than just simply who was the killer. Because Patricia Cornwell has a lot of observations about how the crimes could have taken place. Jack the Ripper committed the crimes by knife, and Patricia Cornwell believes that he was using something called the Indian Pesh Cobbs. Excuse me if I've mispronounced that, but it's a specific type of blade that has a moment of curvature in it, and she believes that that's why certain knife wounds would appear different, why certain things would appear larger, longer, and shorter in some instances. So I think that that's interesting all the same. Now she's putting all of this stuff together. Now, Patricia Cornwell is well aware that her suspect doesn't seem to have a strong medical background or a high anatomical knowledge background. Now, he would have been very familiar with things like drawing people and painting people, and artists do learn a lot about anatomy, and definitely things like figure drawing and portrait painting. Anatomy is incorporated into the artistic process. But what Patricia Cornwell shared in the documentary Stalking the Ripper is that she believes that Jack the Ripper didn't need a high amount of medical knowledge, that he was just attacking women, getting on top of them, cutting downward, and then just putting his hand in the women's bodies, as terrible as that is, and just trying to pull out the organs, no matter what it was, whether it's the kidney, the uterus, or perhaps even the heart with the case of Mary Kelly. Terrible, terrible, disgusting stuff, but that's what the Ripper was doing. And if you want to follow along with all of these Ripper Wednesday episodes, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And every Wednesday is Ripper Wednesday, talking about Jack the Ripper. I have so many mixed feelings, though, about this observation that the Ripper's just putting his hand into the woman's body, literally grabbing whatever he could. And it's something that could possibly be true, but I tend to think that the Ripper might have had more anatomical knowledge. Now, as far as the depictions of people in Walter Sickert's paintings, I completely get that there is a certain element of morbid curiosity. I completely get that there is this type of dark and twisted side of humanity that he's trying to explore, but I also think that that could be just something that is associated with the creative process. He has a very strong creative outlet for whatever type of emotion that he would be experiencing, and a lot of people believe that the Ripper internalized his emotions, specifically anger and rage, but he is internalizing them, whereas somebody like Walter Sickert could always just incorporate them into his paintings. But we should never be too surprised. As we said, sometimes people are very good at putting on facades. Other observations that Patricia Cornwell has made about the case relate to the letters that were written by Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was not only a serial killer, but also letters have been attributed to the killer that are more or less bragging about the crimes and threatening to commit more. And what Patricia Cornwell did was she first looked at the Jack the Ripper letters, and she came to the simple conclusion that they were hoaxes, a widely held belief that the letters were not actually written from the killer. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, the From Hell letter, the Openshaw letter, she thought they were hoaxes. But this is a shocking turn in the book. This is something that really surprised me, where she just had a very big reversal, and she began to think, okay, these letters are authentic. Not only that, there are hundreds of letters that are authentic, and they were written by Walter Sickert. And the way that she justifies all of this is by stating that there is this type of artistic flair that is used in the letters, and she believes that Walter Sickert was intentionally altering the way that he was creating all of the letters in the Ripper case. That's why there's different handwriting on the From Hell letter compared to the Dear Boss letter. That's why there's different handwriting on the Openshaw letter compared to the From Hell letter. And she actually estimates that there were around 250 authentic letters from Jack the Ripper. And I mean, I had to do a double take on that sentence, because 250 letters that were actually authentic from Jack the Ripper. I mean, I've even misunderstood that, but that's just so far beyond belief for me to try and comprehend. And this is a book discussion, so I'm just going to share with you guys what I really think, and that is that It seems like she was going into this with somewhat of a rational and clear-headed mind, and maybe she went down the rabbit hole a little too fast, and she started connecting the dots in a way that shouldn't have been connected, and then is just jumping to conclusions about, okay, this is authentic and that's authentic, and 250 letters from Jack the Ripper. I don't know if I can accept that. And here's something else that I will challenge even more harshly. A core element of Patricia Cornwell's research in the Ripper case, and one of the things that she is famous for, is stating that she believes that the Openshaw letter was authentic, and it contained DNA from Walter Sickert. And the story is actually shared in Portrait of a Killer, and she provides some additional information which is actually somewhat valuable, because one of her claims was that there was a mitochondrial DNA match to Walter Sickert on the Openshaw letter that came after, well, the From Hell letter, and it's almost like a follow-up to the From Hell letter. It's addressed to Dr. Thomas Openshaw, who examined the kidney that was partnered with the From Hell letter. And what she is saying is that in the book she openly concedes that, okay, I said this in the past about the mitochondrial DNA match, but number one, mitochondrial DNA does not completely confirm a suspect. Tens of thousands of people could have had the same amount of mitochondrial DNA. Number two, she isn't 100% sure if that mitochondrial DNA match is even from Walter Sickert because of the possibility of contaminants. And I do think that that's somewhat impressive that she's openly stating it and openly laying it out that, yeah, all right, that could be somebody else's. There's so much time that's gone by, the way that things were handled, that could have been a contaminant. And number three, this is something else that I think it's very good for her to admit. It's very big of her to admit that there is not a lot of forensic evidence that will connect her suspect, Walter Sickert, to the Jack the Ripper case. She openly said that it was an extremely difficult struggle to try and connect any type of DNA or forensic evidence to Walter Sickert, and she openly admits that it's not there. And furthermore, she even states that Walter Sickert was cremated when he died, so his body can't be exhumed or anything of the sort. And, I mean, I think that speaks for itself that there is insufficient evidence. We're not going to get exactly some type of DNA match conclusively about Walter Sickert, but Patricia Cornwell is optimistic in the book Portrait of a Killer when she states that maybe just some way, somehow, something could have been preserved, some type of object might have his DNA. Maybe there could be DNA on some of the letters. But here's a bigger point that I want to challenge. I do not believe the Openshaw letter is authentic. The way that I would rank the letters in terms of likelihood of being authentic from the killer would be number one, the From Hell letter, number two, the Dear Boss letter, number three, the Saucy Jackie postcard. Maybe the Openshaw letter could be number four, but I strongly believe that that letter was not written by the killer. I think the Openshaw letter was a piss-poor imitation of the From Hell letter, someone who knew about the contents of the From Hell letter, and they tried to imitate the horrific nature of the From Hell letter. They tried to imitate the type of calligraphy almost that is used in the From Hell letter, because Patricia Cornwell might be right about one thing. That is someone who's exaggerating their handwriting in a certain way to make it look more horrific. Okay, that could be true about the From Hell letter, but I think the Openshaw letter is a blatant misrepresentation of that. I think it's a blatant mischaracterization of that, and I think someone simply tried to pretend to be Jack the Ripper. However, the text of the Openshaw letter is not horrible in terms of being a hoax. I just think the image, the handwriting, is all not only completely different, I think it's also badly different. And I have a standalone episode on, well, actually all of those letters. I've done standalone episodes on them, but I have a standalone episode on the Openshaw letter, which I invite you to listen to here on Black Box Online Radio. And if you have any ideas for future episodes of Ripper Wednesday, I'm quite curious to know what you guys think. Anything you would request about Jack the Ripper, any specific books or suspects or aspects of the case that you would like to hear about, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. Always taking requests. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I also go live every Tuesday and Thursday for this summer, and that is called True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning, going to you live at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Black Box Online Radio. Now, as far as her observations about the murders, Patricia Cornwell begins with the murder of Martha Tabram, And she talks about how she believes that the murder of Martha Tabram was committed by Jack the Ripper, but she believes that there was some type of rage moment that happened where something set the murderer off. Because she thinks that if this were the first time that this person is killed, maybe Martha Tabram did something to the victim, to the killer, and that's why she became a victim, and that maybe she looked at him the wrong way, maybe she made a facial expression that bothered him, maybe she said something to him that just set him off, and he went into a rage and decided to murder her. And the reason that she provides for this is that Martha Tabram is one of the pre-canonical victims. She's murdered in early August of 1888, about 3 weeks before the murder of Polly Nichols, on August 31st, which truly begins the Autumn of Terror. And Patricia Cornwell is just thinking that Martha Tabram is killed. She is stabbed 39 times. And that is overkill. And she believes that the overkill came from a particular type of rage, where Martha Tabram did something, unintentionally perhaps even, that could have set the killer into rage. No matter what she did, she didn't deserve to be murdered and stabbed 39 times. So I had to take a step back from that when I was reading the book, because I was like, no, wait a second. This is my response. As somebody who just reads about true crime cases, what could be another possibility that would drive somebody to use that type of overkill? Because that is overkill. I completely agree. If you look at somebody like the Zodiac Killer, who attacked victims at Lake Berryessa on September 27th of 1969, stabbing them by knife, he didn't stab the victims 39 times. He stabbed one victim 6 times, one victim 10 times, and 39 stab wounds is overkill. I completely agree. But, again, this is just a general true crime statement. When there is a premeditated decision to commit the murder, or a specific victim is chosen, overkill by stab wounds is very, very normal. And the examples that I always bring up on this channel are Susan Wright, the murderer who was known as the Blue-Eyed Butcher, stabbed her husband 193 times. Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista shooter, also committed 3 murders by stabbing. He stabbed the final victim, George Chun, 93 times. And these are just examples of how when the victim is specifically pre-chosen, there is overkill with stab wounds. Now, was Martha Tabram a specific target of the murderer, whomever attacked her, Jack the Ripper or somebody else? Now, I don't know. And to the credit of Patricia Cornwell, she does bring this up later on. I'm just sharing the information as I learned it. As I was reading this particular chapter in the book, she is talking about how she believes that it's either one or the other, that Martha Tabram did something to the Ripper to initialize his anger for some reason, and then he just took it out on her. Or she even does say that in cases where the victim is pre-chosen, there could be overkill. But think of it this way. The Ripper just loses it on Martha Tabram. Then, August 31st, he wants to commit a more intense murder by attacking Polly Nichols. Then he wants to recreate this pattern of behaviors with Annie Chapman, and then he really wants to just make the killings more and more intense. So when he goes after Liz Stride on September 30th of 1888, he is unable to mutilate her. He is able to kill her, but he's unable to mutilate her. So then that isn't good enough for the Ripper, because the Ripper is more about mutilations. So he makes his way to Mitre Square, finds Catherine Eddowes, and he attacks her, mutilates her as well, pulls out her intestines, throws them over the left shoulder, and then, of course, on November 9th of 1888, he commits the murder of Mary Kelly, perhaps the most vicious murder that ever occurred. All right, I can follow all of that. I understand that. It's just I was providing an alternative possibility, and we do see that from time to time in the true crime world, that there are alternative explanations about how and why killers do things in terms of profiling. But Patricia Cornwell takes a very strong stance. As previously stated, she does not believe that the Ripper stopped killing with the murder of Mary Kelly. She believes that her suspect, Walter Sickert, went on to continue murdering, and he committed the Camden Town murder in early 1800s, 1907, the murder of Emily Elizabeth Dimmock. And she is murdered in somewhat of a similar way to Jack the Ripper's victims, but perhaps not as intense, definitely not as intense as the murder of Mary Kelly. and she definitely isn't mutilated as well as, or as intensely as the other victims. So, with this particular crime, I think the biggest reason she believes that Walter Sickert was the murderer of Emily Elizabeth Dimmock is because he made one of his most famous paintings called The Camden Town Murder about this. And, his paintings are about Jack the Ripper's bedroom, the Camden Town Murder. Is he just hiding in plain sight, openly admitting that he is committing these crimes, demonstrating certain aspects of his psyche when he was committing these crimes? I think that is most likely untrue. Instead, I am forced to say that that is just insufficient evidence. There is such a big time frame that has gone by that states that, but I mean, there's a big time, there's like almost 20 years have gone by to the Camden Town murder from the Autumn of Terror. And unless you're going to say something that the serial killer is operating in phases and they have ups and downs, and also that maybe Walter Sickert continued to commit other crimes, I just, I think that it's exactly what I said about the letters, that she is taking a particular theory and just going down the rabbit hole so fast that she's connecting dots that do not need to be connected. And just some final additional notes that I have about this book, Portrait of a Killer. Patricia Cornwell said one thing that I thought was rather bizarre, and that is that with Jack the Ripper's third victim, Liz Stride, she stated that there is only one photo of Liz Stride, and that's the mortuary photo. She could not find any photos of her when she was alive. And to YouTube listeners, there's going to be one going by on the screen now. Spotify listeners can check this out on YouTube. And you can also just find it so easily on Google. There's a very famous photo of Liz Stride when she was alive. Elizabeth Gustafsdotter, born in Sweden, actually. And as previously stated, Walter Sickert was Danish. I don't think there's any type of Nordic connection. Just putting that out there. I was just surprised that she put that into the book. Now, to people who are very big on like nitpicking and very big on the specifics, I don't think they would like this book because Patricia Cornwell is a professional writer, but she also misspells an enormous amount of words and the names, really just the names. I take it back, and, I'm not necessarily sure why she chose to do that or why it came out that way. And anyway, you're going to find out if you read this book, Portrait of a Killer. And one of the most annoying things in the book is that she just talks so much about how much money she has, and about, as I was sitting alone in the lodge in Aspen, just sipping my drink, all of a sudden I had this type of epiphany. And then she actually even purchased a Walter Sickert painting once, and it came to her in a damaged condition, and there was this rumor going around that she was the one who destroyed it, but she claims that that was not her. It was already damaged when she received it. But, she does brag a little bit about how much money she has, and that is definitely annoying. But overall, I have not read a single novel from Patricia Cornwell, but I can tell that she is a pretty good writer, despite everything that I said about misspelling some people's names, bragging too much about her personal life. The reason why I said that I can tell she's a good writer is, I once attended a presentation on writing, and somebody said, if you want to be a writer, do you like sentences? And I can tell that Patricia Cornwell is somebody like that. She's definitely very good at crafting sentences in a creative way that gets the attention of the reader. And this book will flow rather easily if you're choosing to read it in its entirety. Portrait of a Killer by Patricia Cornwell, about the Jack the Ripper case. Another thing, though, that I will take exception with is Chapter 7 of the book talks a lot about the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick. And this is a story that I followed, not exactly closely. I just try to watch every documentary I can about Joseph Merrick. And she states that the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, is an alternative Jack the Ripper suspect, which is true, and that he suffered from deformities from a condition called von Recklinghausen disease. And I don't believe that that is true. Firstly, even to this day, people are still completely unsure. Not everyone is in agreement on what happened to the Elephant Man. When I first learned about his story in 2008, it was widely accepted that he had neurofibromatosis syndrome 1, and then a couple years later, there was a bit just of this reversal in the medical community where they're saying, no, it was actually a condition called Proteus syndrome, excuse me. And then years went by, and people were saying that it's a combination of neurofibromatosis syndrome 1 and Proteus syndrome, and that he actually had these two syndromes at once, and that's what caused the irregular deformities. I didn't see any of that mentioned in the book. And I admit that Joseph Merrick is an alternative Jack the Ripper suspect. I may have said that sentence once here on Black Box Online Radio, and sometimes I give suspect ratings to the Jack the Ripper suspects and Zodiac Killer suspects and D.B. Cooper suspects, and I don't ever give anybody a 0, but I would probably give Joseph Merrick a 0 in terms of likelihood of being Jack the Ripper. That guy dealt with enough trouble in his life. He doesn't also need to be thought of as a serial killer, let alone that it's impossible. I mean, the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, also had deformities on his hands, and I mean, his disfiguring condition affected his dexterity, too, so he wouldn't be the type of person that is committing any type of murder by knife. Almost certainly not. With Walter Sickert, I think that he is somewhat of a below-average suspect because I just don't think that the evidence that Patricia Cornwell has put forward is convincing at all, and it can all be accounted for by alternative explanations. But what do you think about anything that I've discussed in this episode? What do you think about how the Ripper was choosing his victims and how the Ripper started killing because he was just set off in a rage one night he was bothered by something? What do you think about Walter Sickert's childhood? Does that indicate that he might have gone on to become Jack the Ripper? How old do you think Jack the Ripper was? Do you think that Jack the Ripper wrote 250 letters? Would you like to respond to anything that I've mentioned in regards to this book, Portrait of a Killer? I would love to read your comments. You can put them in the comment section down below, and maybe it'll be worked into a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there's always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Until next time.